This is Basic, the Atari 8-bit podcast.
This is Antic, the Atari 8-bit podcast. I'm Kay Savetz. Guy Nouri was co-founder of Interactive Picture Systems, a company that created software for 8-bit computers from 1982 through 1984. The company's first program was Paint for the Atari 8-bits, which was developed at the Superboots Software Development Lab located at the Capitol Children's Museum in Washington, D.C. Its next program was Movie Maker, an animation program. Next came 3 educational titles for the Atari: Trains, a business simulation; Grandma's House, a sort of digital dollhouse; and Aerobics, a fitness program. It also created Operation Frog, virtual dissection software for the Apple II and Commodore 64, and First Draft, an outline processor for teaching kids to plan their writing. This interview took place on March 7th, 2021.
Well, there's a lot of prehistory because I predate the internet. I practically predate computer graphics. First time I ran into real computer graphics was at Princeton, and they had a molecular biology lab, and somehow they got hooked up with the architecture department, which is where I was. And then they said, okay, let's do some projects together. And they had this amazing Evans and Sutherland picture drawing system, which probably cost several millions of dollars back then. It was a vector-based system. Everything looked like asteroids. And we were able to play with that, and it was never left my mind. And then I went out to California on a lark and wound up in a place called Xerox PARC, where Alan Kay and Dick Schaup and a lot of other people were.
Sure. How'd you end up at Xerox PARC? You make it sound like, oh, you just like showed up on the doorstep.
Well, what happened was I was in Stanford because Stanford was sort of a place to go. And I went into the coffee shop in Stanford, and I ran into a friend of mine, Steve Raven, who had been at Princeton. And he said, oh, you've got to go over to Xerox PARC. And at that time, I don't think I'm giving anything away, it was almost impossible to get in there. In fact, the only reason we got in there is because there was a guard, and he got a job as a guard there because that was the only way he could get a job there, because it was just filled with all these incredible people. So anyhow, we got to get in at 3:00 in the morning and start working on the system. You know, we just did nice stuff, made pictures and stuff. But it was the first time, that was a raster-based system. And it was a first paint system, and it had 10,000 colors, but they were in a 1/4-inch bar at the top of the screen. So you had to pick and choose and see if you could get it. And of course, you just needed $200,000 worth of equipment to draw a picture. So I thought, gee, this is great. Let's do it. Let's just do it small. And then I'm not sure what happened. All of a sudden, there was sort of this warp in time space because everything sort of went away. And then, you surface about a few years later in the PC, the Apple appeared out of nowhere. And nobody expected there to be an Apple, which is, a computer with a keyboard that you hooked up to your TV set. And that changed everything. Now it's hard to get that perspective because we've all got these supercomputers in our hands. But at that point, I think I was very lucky. I had $3,000 to buy a 32K computer. Okay, not meg, not gig.
Sure.
32K. And I was lucky because I didn't get the 16K. And I got a drawing board that went with it, a digitizer that went with it. And it was terrific. The only thing was I couldn't... all you could draw was, 120 by 180 pictures in 4 colors, maybe. And then and I thought, this is too bad. And let's see if we can go a little bit further. So then I went out into what was just beginning to happen. There were 6 places on the planet that had computer graphics, okay, outside of universities. 6 production facilities that had the equivalent of any kind of computer graphics at all. And I went and worked for one of them called Digital Effects in New York City, where my job was, again, pushing the broom. Because, if you wanted to get into one of those places, you were lucky to push the broom. And then you push the broom, you got to learn all about how it all works. And this guy there named Judson Rosebush, who understood my passion. He was passionate. He came from Syracuse University. And we built one of the first paint systems, which was installed in J. Walter Thompson in about 1980, 81 maybe, which was pretty early. Later on, we went and built some more, and I installed them in Olivia and Mather. This is the time when you'd go into a museum and you'd say, here, I have some JPEGs of these paintings. And they'd say, no, we only take Kodachrome. They wouldn't look at a digital slide. Nobody would pay any attention to a digital image because it had a very bad reputation. Of course, it's flip-flopped. Now, you try to hand anybody anything that isn't digital and they don't want anything to do with it. So it was a strange world. I think that's the interesting thing. It was so strange because, it was the beginning of now, but nobody wanted it. Nobody wanted digital. It was too complicated, too messy. And then, and I think there were a few miracles that happened. One of them I was thinking about this morning when I was talking to you, which is the Commodore 64 happened. And God bless Apple and Atari. But when the Commodore 64 happened, suddenly you had a machine with 64K of memory. And it cost a couple of $100, and you could play really cool games on it. So all of a sudden there was a platform for human beings, not corporations. A kid could afford one, and you could compute on it. You could write programs on it. So we wrote Paint, and, Eric Poditz and Mark Scott and Jim Snyder and a few more of us, we wrote Paint. And then shortly after that, I got bought up by Atari. We wrote Movie Maker, which got bought up by Microsoft and also by Electronic Arts. And all of a sudden, everything was just going super speed. And we started working for all these people, Scholastic and Spinnaker. And all of a sudden, everybody was like really, really interested in it. So it was a change, a big change. And, we never dreamt that, the modems then were 300 and 1200 baud. And when they turned to 9600 baud, I don't know if you can even imagine 9600 baud, but, finally you could send images over a phone line. So, we had a full-time phone line between New York and Philadelphia. And every morning we would meet at 9 a.m. for 5 minutes, and we just listened to each other on the phone and sort of get together every morning at 9 a.m., drink coffee, say a prayer, that kind of thing. And we took off like crazy. And we went to CES out in Las Vegas, and we went to the one out in Germany, the huge convention in Germany. And we just had this really amazing time. But what was happening is all the power that we'd seen on mainframes was descending into these personal computers, okay? And suddenly you could make real graphics. And, when I started making computer graphics, if you made a change on an image, you'd go out and have lunch, and you'd wait for Photoshop to process that image, and you'd come back after lunch, and it would have resized your image. These are the things now you do by, moving your fingers back and forth, okay?
Sure. Yeah.
And they took 10, 20 minutes to do that on each thing. So it was weird, but it was good. Then the trick was, we had suddenly entered into the real world, and we went to HBO. We also went to New York Institute of Technology. And, there it was interesting because, again, it was all about big computers, big broadcasting systems. And I went to the international group on publishers, and they didn't like me at all. They invited me, but they didn't like me because I went in with my Atari, my Atari 800, okay, and a Epson dot matrix printer, okay, and I scanned an image, I put it into the printer, I formatted it, and I printed it out. And stuff that they were doing on AAA equipment that was millions of dollars, I was doing at low resolution on $400 worth of equipment. So it's hard to imagine that there was resistance, but there was huge resistance because there was a sea change going on. Suddenly, publishing was no longer in the hands of publishers. Now we see it with the internet, that media might not be in the hands of the media giants anymore. It might be in the hands of a social network, or all the social networks. So, I got to live through that. I didn't die. And now it's for the next trick. What was interesting, though, is to sort of be living through these paradigm shifts. That was really weird.
Let's go back and kind of dig into some of the specifics, if we could.
Sure.
So how did you meet the other interactive picture systems guys?
People?
Yeah.
Well, there's this town called Philadelphia, which is, there's endless praise. I guess I was at another convention. The people who really understood digital were the music people. They embraced it first. And so we went down there for a convention, and we met all these, music people. A lot of them were from Drexel in Philadelphia area, which is a great school for technical people. And, all these guys could do anything with music, but, nobody had tried to do anything with graphics. So we met a bunch of people through Drexel at these conferences. And I say, hey, we're putting together an animation program. And everybody laughed. I said, well, you can do music because, there's not any data really, but you can't, So we tried to do animation. And the first time we did it, we would save pictures, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, up to whatever, let's say 15 pictures for a second. It's usually 30 pictures a second. So we could play about 2 or 3 seconds, and then the computer would break. And then we learned how to do diffs, which are differentials between one image and the next. So we could get up to about 100 pictures, and they would play back in real time, even faster than real time. And then it would blow up. And then eventually we decided to do our own software sprites. So instead of force loading screens, we would move picture memory around. And we didn't actually move anything. We just had pointers, and the pointers would just point at the memory, and whatever was in that memory displayed instantaneously. So suddenly we had real-time animation, and you could record it, you could play it back, you could add music to it. And, that was pretty unbelievable at the time. We won a bunch of prizes and got all kinds of contracts. It felt really nice.
What system was this done on?
It was Movie Maker done on an Atari. Mm-hmm. Then finally we did on the, the Apple and the Commodore. Hmm. So, and that's where we sort of, got established, because suddenly there was not only animation was available to everybody, but real-time animation was available. You could record it in real time, play it back in real time, and send it to your friends, and they could play it back. It produced a file that you could send that would play independently of the program. Basically, it made like a little MP4. We called it an MVM or something like that. And you could send it to a friend, and they could just play it back on their computer. So you could send animations back and forth. It's kind of a nice idea. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So, but your the first program was Paint, which I believe you guys did at a computer lab at a children's museum in Washington D.C. How'd you hook up with them?
I just gotten fired from my job at United Business Publications, where they found out that I really didn't know anything about computers. But I'd made all their databases work, and I could make stuff work, but I didn't know how to code anything. So I got fired from there, but I still did a good job making sure everything worked properly there. So about 3 months later, after they fired me, I was still working there. And the director of the museum came in, and we got along really well. And she said, would you be interested in writing some software? And again, I didn't know anything about software. I just built this huge database, but I really didn't know anything about software. So anyhow, I went down to the Children's Museum, and I took a couple of my buddies from Philadelphia with me. And we worked for about 6 months, which is where we first built Paint, along with a lot of programs for these kids. And I have to say, building programs for kids was a real lesson. I don't know if I told you that before. No. But we would write these AI programs the kids would come in, we'd write a math program. The kids would come in, and they'd go through the, 3 days worth of work, and they would go through it in 5 minutes. So we'd go back to the drawing boards, try again to generate more complicated, puzzles for them. And they'd go through it, 2 or 3 of them would get together, and they get through it in 10 minutes. it took us about 2 weeks to write algorithms that would generate programs that would stump the kids. And it kind of stumped them, but not for very long. And that's when I learned how smart kids were, and and the whole thing about interactivity, which still remains an relatively unexplored area.
So your team was writing programs to be used by the museum patrons in the lab.
Right. Put all their exhibits. There were about 10 exhibits that we put together. But to me, what was interesting is watching an army of 200 kids go into the computer lab, which Atari had funded. So Atari and I think ITT had funded this lab, and these kids would come in the morning, busloads of kids, and so we thought we were real smart. So we would we would make these things that were really, really tough for the kids to do, and these little kids that could they could barely walk, for crying out loud, and they sit down at these computers, and bang, they knocked it out in no time at all, and that's when I got encouraged to not stop. And then, then we made Paint, which was just a way for kids to paint on a computer. But what we did is we actually gave it a palette. We turned the joystick into a brush. We had different moves that you could do with the buttons and the brush. You could pick different colors, and you could play it back. You could save it. You could send it to friends. Kind of all the stuff that we're doing now. But but it was on a 16K Atari. That's pretty cool.
Yeah. So the kids must have been excited to have that exposure to being able to play with computers and have these custom programs.
Yeah, but to them, it was seen like now. It just seemed totally natural. I have two sons who are in their 20s, and they look at me and I try to tell them history. They could care less. They go, "Dad, look, I already got my iPhone, so screw off." And I'm going, "Well, thanks very much." But there was a time. They don't care. And, I'm glad that it's moved on. I'm glad that we don't have to put up with, low speed, low memory devices. I think it's great that we had this thing. Now the trick is to get a little more of the democracy in there that we were trying to get. Now that we have access to the power, and there's nothing intrinsically wrong with Google or Facebook, but, they have created kind of an ecosystem of ego and advertising, which might be limiting the full potential of what could be going on. I mean, my guess is you've seen as much as I have, and the internet is a blessing. But when you're being tracked everywhere you go, and your apps are being tracked and your movements are being tracked, it's kind of an odd feeling. What you really want to do is just communicate, like what you and I are doing right now. Let's just communicate. And out there are people who go, "Gee, wouldn't it be great if the internet were something that we could use without depending on Facebook?" I was thinking of doing a piece of software, which I'm actually working on, that would be sort of a workaround Instagram, because Instagram is nice, but it's kind of awkward. And then I said, "Hey, we're working on a workaround so that you don't have to be in the Facebook, Instagram space." And they go, "Why do that?" And I said, "Well, because it's awkward." And they say, "Oh, no, everybody knows how to use it. It's easy. You just do this, and this." And I said, "Yeah, but then it changes and your images are gone or whatever." And they go, "Well, that's just how it is. Things just change." So I thought it'd be nice to, it's like, when we had parks in the United States, suddenly we have parks. We saved some of the wild land, so that we need the internet is a wild land, and we need to save some of that wild nature of the internet.
Yeah,
there was one, some of these internet sites have been set up so that intellectuals can communicate from all over the world, and they're being shut down because of not enough funding. You don't need any funding to run a network. What you need is just people are participating. So there were 4,000 scientists on this network, and they just shut it down. And it's actually kind of criminal. But the thing is, I think there's people who like to control content. Like in the old days, the record companies like to control all the records. Well, they still control all the records along with Apple. But if you want to, you could release your own stuff. I've got sons who are releasing their own hip hop music right now, and you can make it with or without a company. And I think it's important that we, as individuals, that was the promise of the internet. That's the promise of the personal computer, is self-expression and communications, like what we're doing right now. That's a huge thing that we have, and it's gone all over the world. It's amazing. So we shouldn't let that get locked down by, certain special interests that are, let people make money. That's okay. I have nothing wrong with people making millions or billions of dollars, but not at the cost of everybody has to play the same game by the same rules all the time.
Yeah.
So anyhow, I'm sorry, I got a little bit manic there. The trick is,
I love it.
Well, there is freedom, and we need to, the internet was like, wow, look at all this. We're all hooked up. It was designed to withstand a nuclear war, and it's one of the strongest democratic instruments we have in the universe, and so let's keep that alive. That's all.
All right. So you guys did Paint, which was originally published by Reston, and then Atari ran with it and was published as an Atari product.
That's correct.
That must have been exciting.
And then it got imitated by Apple and Microsoft, which is fine because again, everybody could paint, which was terrific. That's all that mattered, is everybody could paint.
And then Movie Maker, which we already talked about a little bit, which was picked up by Electronic Arts, right?
Yeah,
that's thrilling. Were you guys making royalties off this stuff from EA and Atari?
Oh yeah, we did, and then also you have the ability to sell these things. So we sold the name, we sold the rights to Microsoft because they had a product called Movie Maker 3D, so they wanted to buy the name for us, which was nice because a little boost of cash there for a while.
Sure. And
Microsoft is not as big a demon as everybody would like to think they are. They're actually sort of straight shooters overall. IBM was another company that everybody thought was terrible. It turned out that was kind of a really, if you needed stuff to get done, we did several projects with them, and I was scared to death that they were like the evil computer giant, and it was completely the opposite. And the thing that I thought was going to be cool was Google. Turned out not to be so cool. When I went to visit Google to share some ideas with them, they fingerprinted me as I went in through the door. It was like visiting a police station. Now, I know you're not supposed to say anything bad about Google because that's worse than talking about God. But it's time to relax a little bit. And, the interesting about AI is very powerful technology. And AI is very good at things like face recognition, or at least it's trying to be very good at face recognition. Yeah. Harder with a mask. But one thing AI is really rotten at is seeing what is art. Okay, if you put a bunch of photographs in front of an AI, it could tell you whether it had a chair in it or a cat, or it could even maybe tell you where the picture was taken. But if you had a photograph of a landscape and you had a painting of a landscape, it couldn't tell you the difference, which is pretty interesting. And a human could tell you in 2 seconds.
Sure.
So.
But there have been some interesting experiments with AIs creating art, and some of it is good.
Some of it is good, but again, somebody's also writing the algorithms.
Sure.
So, algorithms are, what's sexy about computers are the algorithms. I mean, that's where all the sex is, for crying out loud. It's in the algorithms. And algorithms can do anything. And, the question is, sitting down and designing a really interesting algorithm. And then, in the stock market now, they've got algorithms mating with other algorithms. They're actually breeding algorithms so that they get smarter and smarter about trades. And, that's good. I like the fact that they're breeding algorithms, but it would be fun to see it happening outside of strictly financial and money-making areas. There are a few people who are doing some good good graphics. I recently just rediscovered Bryce, Bryce. I don't know if you know Bryce. Bryce was a program I played with back in the early 2000s, which was a 3D landscape generating program, which I think is what they use for all the movies. But anyhow, you could get a free copy of it and run it on your PC, and you could generate these magnificent landscapes. I had nothing to do with this program, but I would promote it like crazy because whoever those people are amazing people. So Bryce did this incredible piece of software where you could generate endless landscapes and then move through them. It was fantastic. Again, the people who did the simulations, incredible people doing the simulations. I mean, this is where it gets really interesting. And then Google just let go of, they had a paint system, a 3D paint system called Tilt Brush, and Google just let it go. I think they shut it down literally next month. Here's this really cool 3D immersive VR, AR, VR landscape that you can go and you could paint in three space. And but again, there was no commercial application for it, so they shut it down. Now I don't have the money today just to go buy it up, all the rights to it, but I would. Maybe I will. I don't know. But here's a 3 space that everybody can live in, and you could create art in, and you could share it, and somebody should explore that. Mm-hmm. And Google has the means, and why they let it go, I don't know. So again, it takes some guts. I think that's the thing that I'm worried about. Is everybody goes, oh, I can do anything. I can put up my picture. I can do selfies all day long. I go, that's nice. It's good to share, but and it's nice to see, there are charities that you can get to that you could never get to before, and you can see the people you're helping out. So the technology is fantastic. Now the question is how to optimize the communication that isn't just based on trend or Google's notion of trend that month, because Google's notion of trend changes whenever they change the algorithm every couple of months, I'm guessing. Mm-hmm. So there was freedom in the very beginning. We had sticks and stones to build, I was having to learn microcode for crying out loud. And that was enough to let me know how to talk to Jimmy Snyder, who could actually write hex. And so things would move fast enough on the Atari, when we needed an algorithm that, a piece of program code that could move stuff around really fast, And now we're very distant from the inside of the machine. And I'm afraid the same thing is happening with our relationship to all the capabilities out there. We are distanced, and we're encouraged to be distant, to accept, Instagram as part of Facebook, and that this is how you see things. You put slides up one at a time. Oh, now you can put up a couple of slides at a time. All that kind of stuff. You can put up 5 seconds of video. Okay, in IGTV, you can put up a little bit more video. Again, it's being controlled by marketers, and I like bookkeepers and accountants, but marketing people who don't seem to understand what their full potential is. Mm-hmm. I think we're seeing today. I think you and I are standing at the base of a pyramid that doesn't even exist yet. Okay, that's where we are. We're on the ground floor of a pyramid that doesn't exist yet. Hmm. And the pyramid that goes up is going to last 10,000 years. And everybody's going to wonder how the hell we built it, how we moved those stones into a place. And right now there's, a big stone in the backyard called Google and another stone called Facebook. And everybody's going, oh, look at those big stones. And I'm going, yeah, but it's not the pyramid, for Christ's sake. And, so the question is, how to do that. Mm-hmm. And it's going to take a lot of social interactivity to do that. That's why I took your phone call, because you were interested in the roots and you were also interested in the potential. Mm-hmm.
So after Paint and Movie Maker, your company did some educational software. I have a list of it. It's really not that many things. There was Trains, which taught about timekeeping and scheduling, Grandma's House, Aerobics, and Operation Frog, which was a virtual frog dissection software.
Right.
I believe that was it. So talk about...
No, there was also First Draft, which is still being published by Scholastic.
Is still
First
today?
First Draft is still being published 40 years later.
Wow.
And that got, I think they bought the code from us, and then they handed it to the next guy who's done a decent job with it. And it was the first outline processor. So instead of a word processor or a text processor, we built the first outline processor. Again, a very fundamental thing, but now you could put in lists and lists of things and sort them and organize them, move them around, expand them, contract them. So it was like a, sort of a mini organizing system. But again, it was meant for high school students so they could do their book reports and share their ideas that way.
Mm-hmm. Was that an Apple II program originally? Do you remember?
I think we started everything it may have been Apple initially, and then of course it went to Atari and IBM.
I'm not familiar with First Draft. I'll look it up. All right, so tell me about these other programs, the Trains and the Grandma's House and the Aerobics. Where did the decision? Sorry,
we also had one called Robots that we were doing with Electronic Arts, but we refused to do any violent software. Mm-hmm. You didn't know that you had this political guy on the end of the line here. We refused to do shoot 'em ups, and of course, all the contracts in the world were out there. All we had to do was accept a shoot 'em up, and they wanted a robot to shoot 'em up. Anyhow, we generated a 3D world, and I forgot how many robots. We had at least 4 robots. And the robots would go around this 3D world, and as you travel around the 3D world, you knew where you were by the music that you were listening to, because as you went from continent to continent, so to speak, the music would change. And of course, the robots could go upside down, sideways, whatever else. But, they didn't kill anybody. And so everybody was wondering, well, how is anybody going to be interested in this? Well, they could do all other kinds of interesting things. So robots was interesting. But then I realized that, my particular interest and the people that I was working with who were enormously talented, I couldn't have done it without these guys. We wanted to do something that had more to do with communication. So we got around to, it's called Video Fax, became Video Site. And Video Site took us about 6 or 7 years. And that was where you could put together, video, graphics, slides, text, and send them anywhere in the, on the network. You could build your own private internet and send content back and forth and schedule it. And HBO bought the system for their hotels, and Citibank used it for their internal communications. A lot of these big companies, the CN Tower in Toronto used it for their messaging. So, we had this time, and that was why my company got bought in whenever it was, 1998 or something like that. It got bought 1996, somewhere in there. And, I made a bunch of money and got out of New York and started talking to trees and people and, getting human again.
So I read an interview with you in 84 or something. And at that time it said you had 22 employees and your goal was to create 10 quality software titles per year. And as far as 8-bit, as PC software goes, it seems like you made like the titles that we talked about, Operation Frog and the like, and then it sort of stopped. But there's this gap, I guess, between 84 and when you sold the company a decade later.
We went pro. We got out of the consumer business because I guess, as I said there, you actually had to make 10 programs a year to survive, because in those days you got about 100, we got 150 grand a program, which was, much better than anybody else. But I needed 10 of those to run the company, because the company cost $1.5 million a year to run, and pay everybody fairly. So anyhow, maintaining that level of output was unsustainable. And then we realized you could make one program, make it really, really good, and sell that like crazy. So that's when we got into Video Facts, which in a couple of years became Video Site, which we had a lot of success with, went international, and then we sold the company to G-Tech, which is the gaming company. I like games, but I like, I'm an artist. I like making art, and I like sharing art. That's sort of the big thing for me. And again, because I wasn't in the shoot 'em up side of things, I wasn't really considered that's not what they wanted. The only place I could have gone was simulations, and I tried that once, but that's all military. And the military had companies that were writing shoot 'em ups so they could use that to, enroll people in their drone program. So in any case, that's when I decided that doing communications was more of what I wanted to do. And that took a long time because, you're not just dealing with consumers anymore. You're dealing with corporations that, the communication cannot fail. There can't be the wrong number downstairs in the hallway at Citicorp. There can't be a wrong hotel showing up in the HBO network. Okay. You cannot make mistakes. Okay. That's a whole different thing. There's no, just reboot your system kind of thing. No, these were 24/7 systems. And I can remember my partner saying to me at the time, said, "Hey, Guy, you've never done a 24/7 system before." I said, "Yeah." So he says, "Well, you'll never sleep again." And you don't sleep anymore because your systems are running all over the place 24/7. And it's not like somebody spent $60 on a piece of software and, the worst case is they've got to reboot it and everything is fine. This is like, these are corporations that, so I think the good news was that I discovered how to build that kind of tank-proof software that would run in all these different languages and all these different operating systems. And then the question is how to make it more accessible. And when I first tried to get it out there, people said, "Oh, so what are you doing?" So after Video Site, there was an attempt with something called Dragonfly. And when I went out west, and I went to, there's a conference out there. It's a private conference, and there's a big owl in the lake and everything like that. But in any case, there's people say, "What are you doing?" I said, "Well, I'm working on something called Dragonfly." And I described it to them. I said, "Oh, you're doing YouTube Pro." I said, "What?" He said, "Hey, you're doing a professional version of YouTube." And I should have listened more carefully to them because that's actually what I was trying to do. I was trying to make a YouTube that was professional quality. And now, of course, YouTube does have that. But again, who's got the handles? Who's got the keys? And so that part of me is still very democratic. I believe in free speech. And by free speech, I don't mean hearts and stars. Okay. I mean, I like hearts and stars. They're nice. But, I see, okay, I take a picture of myself. I add hearts. I add stars. I put on an image filter there. Now I look good. There's me, heart, 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 thumbs up. I somehow, like I said, right now we're still in the desert, and we have some ideas about what it could be, and there's a couple of big blocks. Everybody's going, "Oh, look at those big blocks." At Google, it's a really big block. Facebook, what a big block. Yeah, but they're not even, they haven't even stood them up yet.
Right, the cornerstones of the pyramids they're going to build.
Yeah, right. And the thing is, you're not going to build that pyramid unless you've got a couple of thousands of people on board. And what that means actually is couples of thousands of companies. Now it's not like you need 10,000 people to do it. We've got 2 billion people online doing this, 2 to 3 billion people online doing it. But what are we building? What are we building? You have to ask yourself that question. What are we building? So it's like, when I saw those kids come into that room, I said, here, look at all the energy. And a couple of them wound up becoming our programmers. Some of our best programmers came out of that kids' room. They were back 3 years later.
Wow.
Working for us, and I was going, gee whiz, what's going on here? So, there's, I always sort of didn't like that it was called the IT business. Oh, I said, oh, you're in programming. Oh, so you're into IT. Oh, you're a nerd. And I go, okay, if that makes you happy, I'm a nerd. I'd never been called a nerd before, but I guess I was because, I was totally into it. And I hung out with nerds because they were really cool people. And, you could sit down and talk about logic forever, which you couldn't do with normal human beings. And, but the energy that was there, everybody knew that the world was completely changing. We still know that the world is changing. You know it. I know it. Everybody that's out there who's listening or is in thinking, they know that it's changing. And yeah, the iPhone is freaking magic. Okay. And Android is magic. But what are we doing with it besides exchanging selfies and, and maybe supporting child fund, that's good. But, we need to be doing a lot more than that. And the interactivity, which was the word you brought up before, since when is interactivity just, sending stuff back and forth? No, there should be a whole, if you go out and do something, what's interactive is the way that Google mines your data and it brings back something that they think you're interested in. Now, if that were actually happening on a social level, where you were interested in something like building a pyramid, and all of a sudden, 5,000 people show up in a couple of companies that want to fund building a pyramid, that would be great. Or a mothership, or a deep space
doesn't
station.
That happen a little bit now? I mean, two examples are GoFundMe. If you want to build a spaceship, you put it out there and your friends give you money to do it. Or GitHub, you want to build a new paint program, you start and other people can come in and contribute to it. I mean, it's not one pyramid we're building, it's a billion pyramids, and some get higher than others.
Yeah, well, there were, I don't know how they found in the United States, there's something like 5,000 pyramids in the United States that have been documented. North America and in South America, obviously, lots of pyramids. So yes, there will be lots of pyramids, but those pyramids did something. We still don't know what those pyramids did. We don't know whether they were tombs or batteries or, space markers for spaceships. We don't know what they were for. So that conversation, what are we all doing on the planet together? What are we here for? Why do we have these bodies? And, yes, we're here to use an iPhone, but, that's not the only reason we're here.
Sure. Is there any chance you have any of the source code for any of this old 8-bit stuff anymore?
I could probably dig some up, but that would be really exotic. I mean, in those days, to compile a program, you actually had to have your printer on. So when you compiled your code, it would print out line by line the finished source code. And if you ran out of ink or you ran out of paper, our compile for paint took over 6 hours. Okay. And we would sometimes run out of paper, and sometimes we'd run out of ink, run out of coffee, all kinds of stuff. Yeah. No, you're right about GitHub, though. I think that's a good place to begin. And I wish I could remember the name. It was something called like Massive Networks, which they just shut down. And, it was like 4 or 5 top intellectuals from all around the world, and they're just shutting it down. I mean, you don't do that.
Yeah.
If you're a responsible corporation, you actually fund that. Xerox, by the way, funded Xerox PARC. And because of Xerox, the copy company, give me a break. We have the mouse, we have Windows, we have user interfaces. That's Alan Kay. And there was another guy who invented the HyperCard. And he's a genius. Basically, that was the basis of the internet, was the HyperCard. And, and he's still That still never quite happened. So it just needs, it needs, there's a human aspect to what is loosely referred to as IT.
Mm-hmm.
And the programmers even dug it. I mean, I can tell you when we made some of these things, we had one company, it was a division of CBS, and they want us to do a shoot 'em up. And I said, well, we don't do shoot 'em ups. And I said, well, we do flowers. They said, sure. So we made a flower picking program. Okay. And we knocked out this flower picking program. And it was, we just made some money on it. But, you can get people to fund things. It's just a question of what are you funding and where are you going?
Yes. If you do find that source code, I can move it to modern media, and it would be nice to preserve that before those floppy disks rot away. So.
Yeah, I don't even know if I've got the floppy disks anymore. I'll take a look for you, though. I will.
Thanks.
And then I'll talk to Eric and Mark and some of the other guys to see what they've got.
Great. I also noticed that in 1981 you took part in something called the first annual IPS Computer Film Show, which sounds...
Oh my God, you really did your homework, didn't you?
Jesus. Sounds amazing. I mean, the fact that there was enough computer animation in 81 to put together basically a film festival sounds very cool.
Yeah.
Do you have any memories of that?
I'm really glad that you brought that up. Again, when I was at Princeton and had the experience with the vector system there, I also got a chance it took them to record the interaction of the video of the molecular animation. They would do 3 seconds of animation, and it would take them 2 or 3 days to get it on film, and then 2 days to print the film and get it back. So every time they wanted to show somebody their work, there was this lag between generating it and seeing it of a couple of days. All I did was read the manual for the Boulier camera, and I said, oh, wow. All we have to do is change the angle of the shutter, and we can shoot this in near real time and play it back in real time. And so we did, and they were getting their stuff instantaneously. The reason I mention that is because from there, I was the head of the film lab at Princeton. And then from there, when I went on to the Children's Museum, which is where we actually did that film festival, we gathered all the film that was available. I don't think there were more than 30 pieces. You might have the catalog somewhere, but there were 30 pieces. And that was all the computer graphics there were at the time. I mean, there really wasn't. There was one piece, which was a drop of water dropping, and making, the ripples and stuff. And that was, super high definition and stuff from Bob Abel and Triple I and New York Institute of Technology. I mean, these Dolphin, all these guys. But there were like 12 or 15 people who were doing computer graphics at the time. But again, what was good is you put them all together, and all of a sudden everybody knew that something was going on. There was a guy named David E or something like that, and he did some very nice computer graphics back in those days. He'd be worth finding out what he's up to. There were very few people. Larry Gartell. There were maybe at most a half a dozen artists that were serious using computer graphics, and some are still working. But the thing is, the handles. Okay, here's computer graphics. Now all you have to do is buy a tractor, and you have to spend 2 years learning how to drive the tractor. And now, okay, you want to go for a drive, you can go for a drive. And what we're saying is you don't need that. All you need is a bicycle, for Christ's sake. You just need something with wheels and a handlebar, and you can go anywhere you want to go. And and then when the Apple happened and the Commodore happened, suddenly everybody had a bicycle. They could do whatever they wanted to do. Mm-hmm. And that's, that kind of democracy and access to each other was pretty amazing. And your imagination, instead of being something that was locked away, that could never be seen, suddenly you had tools. I mean, think of the world with Photoshop. Think of the images that have been made with Photoshop over the last 10 years. I mean, the amount of imagination has gone from the inside of our brains to outside where everybody can see it and share it. You don't have to be telepathic to see what somebody is thinking now. Okay.
Yeah.
So that's just by putting handles on the hardware and the software. And that's what we did, is we said, okay, let's make this easier for people to get their handles on. And we did. And now, there are other things, IGTV is like, and TikTok, that's, fine, but not really, it's, there's, what are we doing? What are we doing? Before we couldn't do it. Now we can do it. Now that we can do it, we still have that question. What are we doing with it? And yes, it's good to express ourselves here. Me too, me too, me too. I'm here, I'm here, I'm here. I'm all in favor of all that. I got to be Bruce Springsteen of software for a while, for a couple of months, I got to be, different, famous for a little while. It was terrific. But then, you have to get back to work. Why are you doing what you're doing? You have a mission, okay? And your mission is to me, it's very clear, even if I couldn't describe it quickly. You are bringing something to the front that needs, there's a spirit inside of this stuff. We don't know now whether we're in the matrix or we invented the matrix. We don't know now. We didn't even have that question before.
Right.
Now we don't know. Are we living in a hologram, or did we invent the hologram? Or is there a difference? We don't know, but at least we're thinking about it.
Mm-hmm. So hologram or not, what do you do these days? How do you spend your time?
Well, I spend half my time painting, and I exercise a lot because I'm over 60. I'm sorry, but I have to exercise to stay in shape. And then the rest of the time is I have an old friend that I met in India. He had a surfboard, and he and I met in Delhi. He had a surfboard. I had my mother with me, and we were pursuing Guru Maharaji back in 1974. Okay. Long story short, we got in touch with each other after 50 years. We had built a small town for a festival in Colorado in 1970, whatever, 5 or something like that. Anyhow, he's a programmer, and he and I have gotten together, and we're writing a sort of an alternative to Instagram, something that's like Instagram, but completely independent of Facebook, so that people can do whatever they want. They can send it to whoever they want, and you don't have to be right next to the girl in the bathing suit, or, which is okay. But, frankly, I'm not interested in bathing suits all the time, some of the time, but not all the time. And I don't really want advertisers all the time. And I like Lily Singh, but, I don't need to see Lily Singh every day, every once in a while she's okay, And I like Robin Sealark, but at least with Robin Sealark, I can see her when I want to see her, because I go on YouTube and I say, I want to see Robin Sealark, who's a good artist and has a good YouTube channel. And a lot of other people have good YouTube channels. The best thing on the internet right now are the carefully curated YouTube channels. And they're not, there are a bunch of them, but so curation is a big word. When you finally have access to power, you finally have access to resource, you've got deep data. How do you curate that? And curation is a human activity. It's not a machine activity yet.
Right.
Okay, because machines don't have their algorithms are still kind of sophomoric. All right. So curation is very important. And curation by a group is very important. And trending is not the same thing as curation. Okay.
Sure.
I mean, again, I like puppy pictures. I like seeing cats sleep with puppies. I like seeing rabbits fall asleep in the middle of, I like all that stuff. Okay. I'm just as goofy as anybody else. But then every once in a while, I want to go to the Himalayas. Go to the Himalayas. You see how fast you get lost in the Himalayas. They don't know whether they're selling you a vacation in the Himalayas or they're taking you to Tibet. They don't know what you want because they don't have any data. They don't know how to mine the Himalayas. Okay. And I'm not accusing anybody of anything. I'm just saying, if you were to go to Kathmandu, you would get informed. If you go to Kathmandu on the internet, you would have a very odd experience that might have nothing to do with Kathmandu at all. Okay. So I'm just trying to get the reality back into the matrix. That's all.
Mm-hmm.
You know, let it be a tool, not something that drags us around.
Sure.
Okay. So I know those are dangerous words, but again, I watch people go from I can't do anything except shoot somebody on a computer to everybody can use Photoshop. I mean, at one time in New York City, I was probably one of the top 5 or 10 people on Photoshop. These days, I couldn't even, forget, I couldn't hold a candle to these people these days. I used to know everything there was to know about Photoshop. That was 10 years ago. Now I don't. It's okay.
Right. Now there's probably some 15-year-old on YouTube who could run circles around everybody, right?
Everybody. And the good news is that's been passed on. Okay. The fact that animation was impossible. And then Mark came along, the guy who was with, who did Flash. And he came right up to me at one of these conferences and said, "Hey, I want to thank you." I said, "What for?" He said, "You inspired me, to do macro media and Flash." And I said, "Yeah, you practically put me out of business." I said, "Yeah, but before you, it was impossible. Nobody even dreamt about doing real-time animation." So Mark came along and did one better than I did. He did it with vectors. I was still working. I was still moving the pixels around. Okay. I was still moving blocks around, trying to get this pyramid in place. And he said, "You don't need blocks. You can just do it with vectors." And he was right. And then Apple shut down Flash because Apple is crazy. And, an HTML5 came along and that was okay. And, it's gotten better, but there was a lot of cool stuff in Flash. It was pretty cool, those animations.
Yeah, those are fun. What haven't I asked you about the Atari 8-bit days that I should have?
Well, I'm just impressed that you did as much research as you did. I think, there was a spirit there. The musicians, the artists, the writers, we all saw this as, like somebody had just discovered the hammer. Okay. It was like, wow, look, if you smash this thing with a stone, it changes, and suddenly we had something to work with. We had a tool, a soft tool. That soft tool was the computer and the software that went with it. A soft tool. No one had heard of a soft tool before. And for artists, it was perfect. We have a soft tool. And of course, everybody started making video games about hard things. And it was this really soft and gentle tool and very powerful. And now everybody knows what the potential is, all this deep thinking and deep mining and, deep data and all this stuff, but where are the deep algorithms?
If you could send a message to the people who are still using their 8-bit computers today, and you can right now, what would you tell them?
Don't stop. You don't need much. I mean, 8-bit computers, it's painful work. I don't know if they have Java for 8-bit machines, but to me, when Java came along, all of a sudden, and Visual Basic came along, all of a sudden, normal human beings could begin to interface. The thing about an 8-bit computer is you learn what the limitations are, and you learn how to work around them. Okay, now we're in the, God knows how big the computers are these days. What are they, 128-bit? They're probably more than that now, right? So it's the same problem, except you're confronted with vast complexity. Back in the 8-bit days, there was no complexity. There was just, how do you make these things happen with 24 commands? How do you make it all happen? Now we have everything you could possibly use. So that now it's a question, as I call it, curation. You need to select See, people who work with 8 bits, they know how to pick and choose what they're going to go after, and they make it happen. That discipline served me very well. When I went to HBO, okay, they dragged me out to Long Island, and the guy and I that worked together, I remember his name in a second. Anyhow, he dragged me out to Long Island, and he said, we were doing video site at the time, and we went out to Long Island, and there were 3 huge dishes in the yard. He took me back into the studio. There was a 30-foot, desk with 15 computers at it and all these people. And he said, here, we've got $2 million worth of satellites, $2 million worth of computers, and 4 or 5 people, getting big salaries, operating all this stuff. And we put out 2 channels. Then we went back I'm answering your question. Then we went back to where video site was. It was in the basement of the HBO office on 23rd Street. There was one guy operating it part-time on 2 PCs. One of them was a backup, because I insisted on a backup. And he was running 12 independent stations simultaneously. And the cost of the entire project was, under $100,000. He said, how can you make 12 programs for under $100,000 with one person when we're running 2 programs on millions of dollars worth of equipment with millions of dollars worth of people? And my answer is, because I learned how to work with 8-bit machines, okay? That's why. So, yeah, I wouldn't stop working with 8-bit machines. No, I would have fun with them. And then also I would try to apply those skills to solving some of these large problems. And the large problem is not how to merge, Facebook and Instagram and do the same thing and just put the interface on different sides. How stupid. Okay. How do you actually make it so it does something? Here are all these great hookups with charities, and people are doing good, trying to build stuff. And the ecosystem here, we got this huge problem with what's going on with our ecosystem. We're just going to leave politics out of it completely. Okay. We just talk about ecology. Okay. Plenty of organizations. Oh, yes, they all have websites, right? They all have websites. So, yes, everything's okay. No, it isn't okay, because these people aren't talking to each other. Where's the bot that's going around and finding out where all these things are and hooking them up? Who's hooking up Cornell with Texas, with Germany, with, all the different people who are doing different things? Where's that bot that's putting that together, building that pyramid? There's some beautiful things that could be done, socializing, using these things. So anyhow, I just think that kind of thinking that you have to do to work with limited resources. Now we're in a time with unlimited resources. We could take the discipline that we had from the days when we were still learning how to make fire and start, levitating, 100-ton blocks of granite. Okay. So call me crazy. I don't care.
If you enjoy these interviews and would like to contribute, make a tax-deductible contribution to the Internet Archive, a nonprofit digital library that has done incredible things to preserve computer history. Make your tax-deductible contribution at archive.org/donate. Thanks.